And say good morning to everyone who has joined us. Thank you for attending CloudResearch's first ever Innovations in Online Research. We're excited to have everybody here. And for our first session today, we're excited to present some innovations in online video data collection. So we have a wonderful group presenting three really interesting research topics. I'm not going to steal any thunder, so I'm going to let our presenters introduce their own work, but quickly introduce our speakers. We'll be beginning with Lucas Keller, who's actually going to be first up. And then we also have Sofia Gran Ruiz and Jade Gallo will both be presenting next, and then finishing up with Lauren Zadornik. I'm sorry if I screwed that up again. I know we just rehearsed it, so sorry. But we expect each session to take about 20 minutes with 5 minutes for questions between each session. And then, of course, we'll wrap up if we have extra time. And then without further ado, take it away, Lucas.
Thank you very much. So I'm very excited and happy to be here. And I want to talk about observing face-touching behavior in a remote setting. I'm in the interactive video session, but I'm actually not that interactive. You will see that. And I brought you a picture of Constance, which is kind of fake right now because that's the campus, but we actually are not on campus, as you can see in like this very home office looking thing. Yeah. First up, I want to thank my colleagues on that, and I want to present my colleagues to you. So if you want to know more about this research, you can also hit them up, or like mostly Marie-Claire Kabengele and Peter Gorwitzer. And now to go right into, I want to, because this is kind of a strange for me setting, because normally it's a psychological research conference, and I know that the audience is very into psychology or social psychology or motivational psychology, stuff like that. And so we'll only talk about the study in a nutshell. Then I will talk a bit about the experience of online video data collection and challenges and opportunities that we have, and to a brief summary. Okay, so as you all know, I think that's not something that is very new to us, but last year in March, April, the coronavirus pandemic was probably announced, so to say, and we all had to go into the home office, and we still wanted to do research because we had a big research project on the table, and we couldn't do it because of the coronavirus pandemic. So we sought out information and new research ideas, and one thing that we saw was that the CDC posted something about how to protect yourself, and most interesting to us was this last sentence: they avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth with unwashed hands. And this is for us so interesting because there was a paper on this topic like 2 months before that said that it's probably an innate, involuntary, automatic, and frequent behavior, because it's also observed in primates, and it's and like they think about the mechanism, or like the reason for doing it is actually that you smell yourself if you touch your face, and it's like a very, very basic fundamental thing. And even people trained to avoid it still do it. So there's research on a medical class that has an infection prevention course, and then afterward observed, and they still touch their face all the time. I mean, I will do it during this talk as well, and I think everyone else will probably do it about a minute, once a minute as well. Yes. So we thought, okay, maybe something that we did a lot of research in is the concept of specific if-then plans, so implementation intentions, and they might help. And implementation intentions, how do they work, or what are they actually? It's coming from research that is, a goal alone is not enough. So the goal, I want to avoid touching my face, probably does not help much to actually accomplish the avoidance of face touching. But we found in a lot of different studies that with a specific plan that links a suitable opportunity or potential obstacle to a goal-directed response, you can increase goal attainment rates. So one example would be if I see one of my hands going toward my face and I were arrested somewhere else. That's actually a plan we use in the study. So yeah, but you can also have different things, like if I want to become more fit and want to run more. So for example, I could have the specific if-then plan, then when I come home from work, I will put on my running shoes and go for a walk. Also probably not that good in the pandemic, but yeah. Okay, so why do they work? Mostly because there's an increased accessibility and easier detection of suitable opportunities. And also you have faster, more efficient and automatic initiation of goal-directed responses. And there's a lot of research on that, showing it across various health behaviors and mostly conscious behaviors or like very deliberate behaviors, but also sometimes behaviors that are more on the unwanted automatic base or like level. Yeah, so for example, smoking cessation, alcohol use, snacking, healthy eating, cancer screening attendance. These are some of the classic findings. And we have a meta-analytic effects or meta-analysis of meta-analyses of Cohen's d 0.54. So that's quite substantial evidence that this actually works. So what we did in the study is that we first had like an informed consent, of course, and we had to do a lot of, I hope that you can read that. It's very small on my screen, but I hope it's big enough. So informed consent and webcam setups for like a minute or two, where they read a lot of information on how we process that video data. Then they had a first baseline task for 4 minutes. It was either a reading, quiz, or a picture task that was randomly assigned. Actually, only the picture on the right was an actual picture used in the experiment. The other two are just stock photos. But they had to, in this picture task, for example, they had to name the differences between two pictures, or like they count how many pictures there are. And we also adjusted for color blindness. So there's we control for everything. But yeah, so people had 4 minutes to perform one of these tasks. And then afterward, they went on to the goal and plan setting. And in this goal and plan setting, we randomly assigned them to one of 3 conditions. They had either only a goal, they had a goal and a frequency focused plan. So if I see one of my hands going toward my face, then I will rest it somewhere else. And they had a duration focused plan. So if I feel one of my hands in my face, then I rest it somewhere else. In the latter case, the thing is already happening. I just want to cut short how long it is happening. And that was also more like a backup plan, the last one. We wanted to at least see if something is happening. So the whole thing is really exploratory. We thought we could do something, but we weren't sure if that whole thing works. But so I can show you some of the results. So this is the face, of course, yeah, and the different areas that could be touched. And we've observed around 0.84 touches per minute. And that's very in line with previous research, even with the medical students. And around 40% of those touches were in the critical areas, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, because they're the mucous membranes. They're like very critical for infections or self-inoculation. And these touches were really long on average, but you can see there's variance between areas. So touches to the eyes were substantially shorter than touches to the chin, because it's the thinking pose people did and stuff like that. And we analyzed about like 31 hours of video material, and 18% of the time people spent with their hands in their face. So that's kind of interesting, like, yeah. And yeah, I will talk about the limitations later. And this is just like the basic finding of the plan manipulation. These are model estimates from a linear mixed model, so I don't want to talk much about that. But what we basically find is that if there's a baseline difference, which we somehow, even through randomization, find, there's room for improvement for the duration focus plan, and these participants actually reduce their face touching when it comes to the experimental task. But we can't really say if it's because of the plan or if it's because of the baseline difference. It's kind of hard, but yeah. Okay, so now coming to the second part of the talk, the challenges and opportunities. I wanted to start with the negative and then go on to briefly talk about the positive. One of our anticipated problems was that many participants still, they won't allow us to take the video and will not take part in the study as soon as they read about the video problems. And we can't force people to do so, and we can't pay, or we had ethical concerns about paying more to like increase participation, because we didn't want to make it like a, what do you say, like a temptation for people, like just give out their video because they are paid much money. So we had like a good payment, but not like a credible payment for participants. So yeah, there was a bonus, so to say, in compared to a normal study, but it wasn't that big. So we thought, okay, what we can do is like making it very explicit. having a very explicit study description, explicit informed consent, really bring it home that this will be a video recording study. So it was called video recording study. It had webcam required in the header, and still we had kind of low. Sorry, and the second thing was, it's not on the screen forward. Okay, and we had a setup phase at the beginning. That means that, and after the informed consent, participants saw themselves in the webcam feed. They would later send us, or like the recording, without actually being recorded. So they had like chances to get rid of anything in the environment, to tell other people that, hey, I'm now in a video recording study, please don't come into the screen, and to see how much we would record. And this setup phase at the beginning was one countermeasure, but we had really low completion rates that were between 10% and 43% when looked at CloudResearch, compared to like a normal study. I checked that for the first time, I guess, but I had between 75 and 90% is my usual completion rate on studies. So it's really, really low. And 1/3 of dropouts, and we're talking here about like 250 dropouts, so it's not that few people. 1/3 of dropouts were actually in the video setup phase, and others during the first task. And we're not quite sure if it's because the video has to work to get into the first task, so it's not that like there's a technical problem, but we're not sure if it's more because people don't like timed tasks on mTurk, or if it's actually because of the video recording. Yeah, and no one, that's quite a cool finding, no one landed on the informed consent page and did not advance further. So we didn't have people that didn't read about video recording, I guess, before. Okay, so then the second anticipated problem was this won't work on every other device, and people get stuck in one of the tasks and say I won't advance. We tested this on many devices possible. We sent it to every friend, colleague or something, and ask them to try out on every browser they have, every device they have. And we found that Safari, the Apple provided browser, actually didn't work. So we had to say to people, like, use anything else than Safari. And we included some fail-safe mechanisms. I can talk about that later. But it was kind of just the basics are that normally like the task would start with the recording. Like, if you click on record now, then the task will appear, and then after 4 minutes the recording will stop and Qualtrics would get a signal that it should advance. And we had like a fail safe that after sometimes Qualtrics would advance every even in case it never got a signal. We had like bad coding there, so actually this fail safe cost us about 120 video recordings because they were cut short. They were not a full 4 minutes. And without the failsafe, this worked very better, and we actually had not so much technical problems. And the challenge number 3 is the unusable recordings, that everyone will cheat, black out the webcam, no video will be usable. And to safeguard or to countermeasure that, as a countermeasure, we had a monetary bonus that was contingent on successful video recordings. We were very lenient on that. So if you had like, when you're sitting like that or something and we couldn't see your face, we couldn't use your video, but you still got the bonus because you had the video recording. It was not like, but there were people that had, like, I can put that like that, and then that was like, for the first 5 seconds, you could see their face, and then afterward, they just blacked out the screen. This happened. So we had 250 completions roughly, and what we could use video of 156 participants. So we had problems with the failsafe. So I would say like 80% or 75% were technical problems or like failsafe problems, and the rest was just like they did not show their face the entire time. The recordings were too dark, or in one case we had someone who had a child in the video, and we immediately deleted the video because that was against the regulations we had and stuff like that. So, okay, to summarize the challenges, we had definitely higher than usual dropout and lower completion rates. So that's one thing that goes also into the limitations of our finding, but we had some problems there. We had a huge variance in participants' equipment and setups, but that went surprisingly well. So the whole setup, it was in Qualtrics, it was done via AdPipe, that's the service provider, and there was not really a problem with the technical thing. So yeah, and then we had unusable recordings, but they were mostly due to our own coding flaws, and roughly 25% were actually because of things the participants did. Okay, so opportunities, and this is also shorter than the first thing, but data collection was incredibly fast. So we had done it in waves because we didn't want to rely on a single day and or a single week. So we made more like 2-3 waves per week, and then for 4 weeks or 3 weeks, and had like video data of all those participants, like 30 hours of video data in 3 weeks, which was amazing, which we never would have done in a lab or something. And of course, like the biggest opportunity here is that we could observe behavior in times of social distancing, and we couldn't run studies in the lab at this moment, and data was hard to come by, or were hard to come by any other means at this moment. Yeah. And the last one is more economical, but it was surprisingly cheap and easy. It took us about like 2 days or something to implement it. It took us like 10 days, I guess, because to make like all the coding perfect, because we were making so many errors at the beginning. But I think if it's not that, we had something like, we didn't want to show participants their webcam feed in the actual task because we didn't want to increase the self-awareness. And it was kind of not the basic implementation of this provider, so we had to do some adjustments. Okay, but it cost us around $120 for like 30 hours of video, which is kind of weirdly cheap, I would say. But yeah, it was less than 10% of total costs. And yeah, so to sum it all up, concerning the study, we could show that plans might help. There's potential for that. If there's room for improvement, they could actually be beneficial. Regarding the video recordings, they were cheap, fast, and efficient to get observational data. There's, of course, a huge limitation that we wanted to see face touching, so webcam feed is important. But if you want to see gesturing or something, they would have to have a webcam feed that actually captures that, and that's not that easy and unobtrusive, because you want to maybe don't want to tell people what you're actually about. And yeah, okay. And it's not without problems. We have high dropout, unusable video recordings, very low completion rates. They were better at the end, but they were really low at the beginning. I'm not sure why that is. So in sum, it's a great tool with a few limitations, but I would definitely recommend it. If you have questions while implementing it or something, you can hit me up. Here's my social media on the top, and then another picture of the campus of the university concerts. It's mere like my longing for going back to the university, probably than like showing off or something, I'm not sure. And my references, but I will go back to that, and when you have questions, you can. Yeah. So that's my talk. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Lucas. And for the question and answer section, we're going to give 5 minutes for anybody to ask any questions. You can either type them in the chat, either on the session page in the website, or in this chat, which might be a little bit easier, so I don't have to look at 2 different screens. Or if you'd like to speak your question, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you, or unmute yourself. You should have that capability, but if not, just let me know. So I'll open the floor to any questions. I will try to make sure I can see everybody who would like.
Lauren has a question? Or is it just the wrong emoji?
Yeah, no, I indeed have a question. So did I understand correctly that you recruited via MTurk?
Yes, via CloudResearch, actually.
Via CloudResearch, okay. So we had our account suspended from MTurk a while ago because we were making video recordings of the workers, and MTurk informed us that this is not allowed via via their system anymore. Do you have any idea whether they've changed that, or what, like, because it's one of the reasons why we stepped away actually from MTurk, because we were not allowed to make video, like webcam recordings anymore.
They must have changed it, because as I maybe told you, but it was June, July of 2020 when we actually ran the study, and we actually checked with them that this is possible, and we were concerned that this is way too personal, and but they said like at least, or if you don't ask them for their name, email address, if you tell them that you will record a video, then it's fine. Maybe they changed it since then. That would be a bummer, I guess, but yeah. So you went to Prolific or something as an alternative?
We try to recruit via our own ways, which
Okay.
is definitely not as fast as the types of numbers you just showed us for MTurk.
Yeah. That's something that's completely new to me and kind of, yeah, no, that's not good.
It could also be like, I'm trying to think when we ran our initial study on MTurk, like we run multiple studies on MTurk, but the last one that I can think of, I think we ran in early 2020, and then indeed somewhere around the summer, I think this is, or maybe after the summer is when they told us it's not allowed anymore. So I guess I will go back to their policy and see whether they may have changed it by then or whether they've changed it back, because it would be pretty
actually
useful.
Also surprising to me, because that was actually our name of the study, and if you can see it there, that was our whole advertisement for the study on that's a CloudResearch preview, I guess, but this is how it should look to MTurk workers as well. So it couldn't be more obvious that there's video recording in there.
Right? Yes.
Yeah, it's the collection of the personally identifiable information that's the key. So as long as you're not collecting names and emails, MTurk is happy as long as you can keep it anonymous for the workers.
Okay, I'll have to go back to our system. I think ours was anonymous, but it's good to know at least, because then at least we can go back to maybe using the system.
Absolutely. Great. Next question. Actually, Lucas, I did have a question. Did you use our managed research offering, or did you do the recruitment on your own?
It's the managed research. I just went on CloudResearch and then put it in there. So no managed research, I guess. I did it on my own. Great.
That's great. I always find that the biggest challenge is like, how am I going to do this myself? Because I always get, again, I'm the quant guy, so I get overwhelmed when we're doing qualitative recruitment.
So much easier than doing lab work in your own place. So yeah, so I'm fine with like struggling for a bit.
Wonderful.
It was also interesting to prepare this talk because now I saw that my usual completion rate is like 80%, and this one was at the best 40%, which is kind of hard to look at now. And I'm all like, this is already submitted work, so if I go get another revision, I will put a sentence in there like, please there's these really low completion rates. But on the other hand, we randomly assigned after participants already did something, so we don't have to take care that people are really different, like the dropout is differential or something. So it should be okay for our conclusions, but it's hard if you have something like only one condition has a webcam stuff. Only one condition would have a webcam, then people would drop out selectively. That would be a big problem. Yeah. Actually, okay, I see a question in the comments. Actually, we had no problem at all with our IRB here. Our IRB is really lax, I would say. They just say if it's not invasive, it's okay. So we have ethics approval for that. It didn't take long, actually. They said don't collect personal information, and they were really strict on like complying with GDPR, like the data regulation of the EU. And after we made that sure that the thing is hosted in like the data came from American participants, it was transferred into the European Union by the video processing service, and then never left the European Union, and that was okay for them. Yeah.
Great. And just keeping things moving along. If you have any other questions, you can put them in the chat, and then Lucas can follow up with answers for you there. But we'd like to move on to our, yes, thank you very much. And we'd like to move on to our next presentation from Jade Gallo and Sofia Gran Ruiz from the University of Connecticut. And again, I'm not stealing any thunder, so I'll let the researchers present their work.
Thanks, Chris. Can everyone see the intro slide? Yeah, okay, great. So my name's Sophia. I'm here with my co-presenter, Jade. Jade, give a wave. We're so pleased to be part of this panel presentation series. With our time, Jade and I are going to tell you a little bit about a recent project we undertook in creating a new measure for diagnosing racial trauma and some innovative interview methodology we used as part of the measure's validation. But before we begin, despite the participants of the study being primarily American, our lab and much of this work took place in Ottawa, Canada, and so we want to do a land acknowledgement. We pay respect to the Algonquin people, who are the traditional guardians of the land we sit on. We acknowledge their longstanding relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous peoples in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. And today, we also pay respect to the Canarsie, whose traditional land is present-day Brooklyn, where Jade is currently delivering this presentation. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. In terms of our plan for this short talk, we wanted to do some short introductions, also orient you a little into the project that employed this innovative interview strategy. Talk a little bit more in depth about the interview component, as I imagine that's probably what you're most interested in hearing about. And then also share some lessons we learned, or really strengths and weaknesses observed of the methodology we employed in practice. So Jade.
Hi, so I just want to introduce myself quick. My name is Jade Gallo, and I am currently based in Brooklyn, New York, but I graduated from the University of Connecticut in 2020 with a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology, and I am currently working as a research assistant under Dr. Monica Williams at the University of Ottawa. Some of my areas of research interests include psychedelic assisted therapies and making them more accessible to racialized and stigmatized groups, specifically to treat racial trauma and PTSD, as well as mental health disparities and how to combat them, to name a few. I'm also currently looking to obtain my PhD in clinical psychology next fall, so hopefully I will be back in a program next year.
Thanks, Jade. And as I stated, my name's Sophia. I'm based in Ottawa, Canada. I have a background in biomedical sciences and health sciences, as well as psychology. And I'm currently a second-year doctoral student in clinical psychology at the University of Ottawa under Dr. Williams. My research areas of interest are working with racialized and stigmatized groups, mental health disparities, cultural competence in research and healthcare, and trauma and stressor-related disorders, so like PTSD, racial trauma, intergenerational trauma. And so if it isn't clear, sort of as a little disclaimer from Jade and my bio, we are trainees, students, and certainly not methodology experts. So we'll try our best to share with you our takeaways employing this innovative interview technique, but from the perspective of student researchers, interviewers. The real nitty-gritty details are best known by our CloudResearch team, and we can happily collect any really detailed questions at the end and direct them to the appropriate expert. Jade? Oh, Jade, you're muted, I think.
Sorry. Before we get into it, we just wanted to give you guys a little introduction to where we come from, because Sophia and I are just a minor part of a much bigger picture constructed by Dr. Monica Williams, the director of the Laboratory for Culture and Mental Health Disparities at the School of Psychology at the University of Ottawa. But her work didn't start there. Her career started in the United States, but eventually made its way to Canada, where she's implemented her groundbreaking research. Which includes an abundance of research experience in psychedelic assisted therapies, OCD and some of its rarest forms, microaggressions and therapist trainings for cultural awareness, and most notably in racial trauma and mental health disparities research, where she's considered to be an authority on the subject as she is a Canada Research Chair for Mental Health Disparities. Two of her books are shown here. Eliminating race-based mental health disparities and managing microaggressions, to highlight her work amongst over hundreds of other articles and blog posts and journal entries she's written over the years. And before we get into our research approach, we wanted to orient you to the issue of racial trauma and why this research is so important. So this is Sharon. She is a 22-year-old First Nations woman currently completing her law degree. She travels back to her northern rural town in Canada in the summers to work at local pharmacies and help finance her studies. She loves spending time with her friends and family. However, the prejudice and discrimination she experiences has been becoming increasingly difficult. A few weeks into her return, while at work, a white customer mistook her for another customer and closely followed her around the pharmacy. When Sharon confronted the customer, the woman admitted she was following Sharon to deter her from stealing. This caused a heated argument about prejudice and racial profiling. Sharon's supervisor was not supportive and asked Sharon to keep her opinions to herself. She has experienced similar incidents at work, the local grocery store, and just around her town. She also has had recurring intrusive thoughts about these incidents for weeks after they happen. Driving to and from work has also resulted in Sharon being pulled over by the police 4 times for routine checks. But when Sharon asked her local white friends if they had similar experiences, not one person had been pulled over in the past 6 months. Sharon was also deeply saddened to read in the town's paper of a violent attack on some First Nations woman in a neighboring township. This news caused her to think a lot about the countless and other missing murdered Indigenous women and girls who suffered from similar injustices. As a result, Sharon dreads leaving for work, risking possible confrontation with locals or police. She also notices that her anxiety mounts during the drive from home work, and her heart starts pounding by the time she reaches the parking lot. So as a result, she stays home in the protection of her home, as opposed to going out with family and friends. When she's not working, she also finds herself feeling anxious, questioning her abilities, and becoming more socially withdrawn. Moreover, she's jumpy, irritable, experiencing intrusive thoughts that perhaps she's to blame for racism, and overall very not herself. Which brings us to all of these symptoms can take in the form of what we call racial trauma, which is a severe mental and emotional injury caused by the cumulative traumatic effect of racism throughout life. And while symptoms do mimic PTSD, this occurs over several instances over a lifetime, unlike one traumatic event in normal PTSD. So these cumulative events, even though at the time might seem so small, they can contribute to an overall trauma for this person that does mimic PTSD. And it does show the same severity as veterans and sexual abuse victims who do suffer from PTSD. People who suffer from racial trauma, it is just as severe, and it's estimated that 30% of people of color do suffer from racial trauma.
Yeah, and we share this with you, one, because I think the more people that are aware of racial trauma and the signs, the better, but also so that you can get an idea as to the type of population that this project might require and some of the challenges we might experience in doing interviews with this group.
One essential component of mental health care is the ability to accurately identify and measure symptoms in order to arrive at a proper diagnosis. An appropriate diagnosis, in turn, informs clinicians' understanding of the scope of the issue, as well as enabling them to deliver appropriate clinical interventions. However, despite a growing body of evidence explaining racial trauma, clinicians face several barriers that make it difficult to properly identify it within clients of color. For many clinicians, it's the general lack of awareness and knowledge of the damaging physical and psychological impacts of discrimination on people of color, which then leads to incorrectly attribute observed trauma to other causes. For others, assessing discriminatory stress in patients from different ethno-racial groups may prove to be uncomfortable, and the confrontations can be awkward, potentially harmful in interactions, and avoidance of the topic by the clinician altogether. This lack of skill and uneasiness in discussing discrimination could be widely addressed if clinicians had access to appropriate tools. Yet even when clinicians are sensitive and willing to work with clients who do have racial trauma, culturally appropriate measures don't exist and to adequately identify sufferers within a clinical setting. Few, if any, include racial trauma-specific prompts or were validated using ethno-racial minority samples. Moreover, the majority of existing PTSD measures assess client impacts following one distinct traumatic event and not the cumulative impact of several small events over a lifetime, as is commonly experienced with racial trauma. But one exception to these scales includes the racial-based traumatic stress symptom scale, which was created within the aim of assessing symptoms associated with experiences of racism and discrimination. But the RBTSSS is not without limitations. It includes a complex scoring system. It focuses on a single memorable experience of discrimination, and it doesn't adhere to the DSM-5 framework for diagnosing trauma. Another exception, though, is the Yukon Racial Ethnic Stress and Trauma Survey, which is a clinician-administered measure meant to assess the cumulative impact of various memorable experiences of racism through one's lifetime. Despite being a strong and easy-to-use culturally component tool for assessing race-based traumatic stress within the DSM-5 framework, the measure is very lengthy and can take over an hour to complete. So with all of this being said, the primary objective of this study was to develop and evaluate the initial validity of the Racial Trauma Scale, or the RTS for short, which is a novel self-report measure to quantify trauma symptoms specific to racial discrimination. And how did we validate this scale? Well, we did it in 2 steps. Step 1 was the recruitment, was administering the RTS to a large group of diverse and representative participants with a sample size of around 940 participants and a white control group. Recruitment for this study was conducted online through CloudResearch, and our eligibility criteria included anyone over 18 years of age. They had to identify as African American, Black, Asian American, Latino, Hispanic American, or White European American, spent most of their childhood in the United States, and was able to read and speak English. Only eligible CloudResearch members were able to view the posted recruitment invitation, and if they accepted the invitation, they were then able to complete the consent form and online battery containing the surveys. The participant population of CloudResearch does have similar graphics, demographics to the general United States population, and geographical location and gender distribution. So the participants recruited were, considered to be a nationally geographically representative sample. 2 independent people of color samples were used for the analysis and scale validation, samples 1 and 2, and as well as the non-Hispanic white samples for sample 3. And step 2 was where we validated the diagnostic ability of the RTS by comparing it to an older established measure via the video interviews, where approximately 1/3 of our participants from step 1 were interested in participating in step 2 with the goal of being to interview at least 100 participants. So this sample, like I said, we gathered from our original sample pool of 940 participants. And for an efficient validation process, we needed the interviews to be done in a timely manner while also needing a diverse and representative sample of interviewees. So in order to do this, we started with scheduling interviews. However, too few were showing up, and we were finding it was taking way too long to do it this way, which brings us to.
Yeah, thanks, Jade. So after unsuccessfully trying the scheduled interview approach, we went for a real-time recruitment approach. This worked by the interviewer, me, choosing interview times that were convenient for me. I then shared them with my CloudResearch counterpart. 10 minutes before my desired interview time, the CloudResearch contact would issue an email invitation to about 20 participants. The participants notified were those from part 1 of the study that upon completion of the new measure were open to being interviewed. The 10-minute period was chosen by CloudResearch as they deemed that was the appropriate amount of time needed to post an invitation on the CloudResearch dashboard for a participant to notice it, to read through the consent form, test their technologies, and then enter the video session. And then the very first participant to enter the video session was the participant that was accepted for the interview. If more than one person tried to enter, only the first could be admitted, and those that were too slow were compensated for their trouble. So what was the innovative about this strategy? It was really the real-time recruitment approach to scheduling these interviews. Now, as someone who completed more than 1/3 of the interviews conducted, I can share with you how this approach worked in practice. Strength-wise, well, as a researcher, I really appreciated the convenience for me getting to choose the time that I wanted to interview, but of course the time saved and always having someone to interview was appreciated too. I can't tell you, and I'm sure my fellow panelists can agree, how many times I've bussed to campus for a scheduled interview to have nobody show up. And this rings especially true when undertaking the work related to racial trauma. As we shared with you in the vignette about Sharon, racial trauma is pervasive, it's distressing, even more when you have to talk about it. And, so an individual may have the very best intentions to participate in an interview about the personal effects of racism and discrimination, but the closer they get to the time that is selected, the less they feel like opening up to a stranger about these deep wounds. So with this method, even if there were no bites in the first 20 invitations sent, another 20 could be sent quickly afterwards. And so I don't actually recall a time where I attended an interview slot and didn't end up actually interviewing someone. Of course, this way also results in timely data collection. It's fairly easy to have participants complete a measure online, but then to follow up with the interview shortly after is difficult. And the shortly after is key because, of course, if there are several weeks or months between completion of the of our trauma tool and then validation with the interview measure, it's possible that some cases of racial trauma will have resolved themselves. You see that in PTSD as well. Or that some individuals will develop racial trauma in between administration of the measure and the interview. For instance, if any participants completed our measure in April, and then, the interview validation in May, following the very public death of George Floyd, they may have developed vicarious traumatization. So time was of the essence, and the schedule approach just wasn't cutting it. We had 5 interviews over several months trying the scheduled approach, and we're actually able to complete over 100 just in a summer using the real-time method. Another positive was if you had back-to-back interviews scheduled, there's no need to worry about interview overruns because the new round of invitation is sent when you're ready and you ask for them to be sent. So I actually recall a participant who had a speech impediment and took about twice the amount of time it would take for another participant, and didn't have to worry about that conflicting with another scheduled time. And this is especially important when working with people of color, on such a heavy topic. You want them to be able to take all the time that they need and that you need to help them to feel heard and validated. Another strength was the flexibility to handpick participants in real time based on a desired characteristic. For instance, we did interview some white participants to serve as a control group, but if we noticed we were doing too many of those interviews, we could easily just tell our CloudResearch contact to only send hits to participants of color. Or I can recall another time where, I had a couple of back-to-back interviews with people of color with, heartbreaking and emotionally draining, experiences. And so I asked to be sent a white contact who was less likely to have experiences of extreme racism, just to give my mind a break. This approach was also helpful in dealing with the inevitable tech issues that accompany these kind of video interviews. Usually these kinds of tech problems will happen within the first few seconds of the interview. A camera can't turn on or a mic doesn't work. And so after spending a few minutes troubleshooting, you can just boot that participant out and allow another to enter. But of course, no approach is perfect. Some limitations observed, well, most obviously, you probably picked up on it, occurring when more than one of the 20 participants is interested in wanting to partake. Recall that only one could be admitted into the video session, and so this led to some pretty frustrated participants. I can recall one individual trying 5 times and just missing out by a hair each time, and so he ended up reaching out to our supervisor to complain. And so in that case, we ended up scheduling an interview with him at a time that was convenient for him. But there was at least one more instance where a participant was frustrated, wrote the supervisor, and said that they no longer wanted to be contacted. I wouldn't be surprised if there were other participants who we didn't hear from directly, who didn't end up clicking on future invitations. Also recall those that were interested and clicked on the invitation but were unable to get in received a small amount of money as compensation. And that can add up over time and be worrisome if you have a tight budget. So I think we'll end there and allow for some questions. Here's just a slide with our contact information in case it's needed.
Thank you very much. Really interesting. So for the participant pool, you went through CloudResearch and you used MTurk, or was it Prime Panels for the recruitment?
From my memory, I think it was Prime.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And for the folks in the audience who may not know the difference between the MTurk pool and the Prime Panels pool, Prime Panels is a collection of traditional market research panels, so it's a much broader and larger panelist base, which allows us to do recruitment, especially of underrepresented groups such as this. So I'm glad it was able to be successful for you. Any other questions? I didn't want to. Oh, I think we do have a question in the chat, or is it? Yep, we do. So.
Oh,
question in the chat.
that's nice. Another Ottawan.
Great. So
Right.
I'll read the question quickly. Are there any demographic differences between those who participated in an interview versus the original survey sample? Are there any differences between those who made it and the two slow ones?
That's a good question. So we were being very conscious to try to maintain that representation. So we were actively trying to make that larger, like step one, the 940, reflected in the 100 interviews. So maybe if we hadn't been making a conscious effort, then it wouldn't have been, but we did try to make it represented.
Excellent. So our final piece will be from Lauren. And again, I'm not going to steal the thunder in trying to describe your research. And again, so we're looking forward to the next and final segment in our innovative online video data collection.
Yes, hi, thank you. As Chris already said, my name is Lorenza Noordijk, and I'm a postdoc at Trinity College in Dublin, where I'm working together with Professor Roger Cusack on online infant studies. And I would like to start, of course, by thanking CloudResearch for organizing this event. And today I will be talking to you about conducting, especially looking studies with infants online. So there are several ways in which one can study infants online, and during the pandemic, of course, developmental scientists, like most other psychologists, have resorted to conducting studies using video conferencing software, for example, Zoom-like type of setups, which are often referred to as synchronous testing, or they have resorted to browser-based testing, which is referred to as asynchronous testing or unmoderated testing. And this last one, this asynchronous testing, will be the focus of my presentation today. And specifically, I will talk about how browser-based looking behavior studies, in which we record infants' looking behavior via a webcam while they are looking at stimuli displayed on their home computer. So measuring looking behavior has been very useful in infant studies in the lab because it's one of the measures that you can relatively easily get from infants. And of course, we would like to reliably expand this measure to online studies. My talk will be somewhat of an introduction of the topics to think about for any developmental scientist who is considering testing looking behavior online, but I'm also trying to raise points that apply to other types of online testing, and I'm hopefully going to say things that will be relevant to non-developmental researchers and industry partners who might be interested in collaborating with developmental scientists. So why would you want to do online studies at all? I think if in this type of conference, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I would like to still go through these benefits with you. So obviously many people have been considering online testing during the last 18 months due to the pandemic. But I think it's worth keeping in mind that online testing was already done before the pandemic and actually has benefits beyond limiting infection rates. So first of all, it's much more convenient to our infant participants and their parents. They don't have to come to the lab. They can participate whenever the infant's in a good mood, etc. And it is much more convenient for us as scientists because at least in this asynchronous testing, we don't have to schedule lab visits or experiments. We don't have to train students to test participants and so forth and so forth. And due to this increased accessibility, online testing has the potential to test large and more diverse samples. I think we've also seen examples of this in the two talks before. And I will make the disclaimer that although it has the potential for more diverse samples, experiences from our lab, but also other developmental labs, show that it does not necessarily pan out that way, that you still have to actually put in some real effort to achieve a good sort of representative sample. So other benefits relate to science and its impact. So I think with online testing, by the automated codified way in which asynchronous testing works, you can increase the reproducibility of the same study across different labs, which of course makes it easier to collaborate internationally or across labs while maintaining control over the exact procedures. And because of the increased accessibility, online testing methods may potentially become part of screenings or interventions, which would reduce the need to either travel to the participant or the patient, or for them to travel to the lab or the clinic. Despite these benefits, so I basically went the other way than what Lucas did. I started with the positive and I will now be going to the slightly more challenging bit. So despite these benefits, it must be said that testing infants online isn't easy, and it does have its unique challenges. And it's important to stress that with any method, it's suitable for some research questions more than others. And it definitely should not be seen as a replacement to lab testing, but rather as a sort of enrichment to the methods. The methods toolbox. I think it's also important to mention that many of the existing online testing platforms have been made for adults and or for English-speaking populations. They don't always include the possibility of making webcams. So these sort of become relevant if you want to make webcam recording of infants. But there's been massive progress over the last 5 years when it comes to infant testing. So if you wanted to engage with testing infants online, I think the ethics and data protection are among the first things to start thinking about. So in terms of ethics, there's of course always a very long list to consider, and I won't go into all of that, especially because our infants are considered a vulnerable group. But I would like to especially highlight, as was also mentioned in the chat earlier, that since we're making webcam recordings, we're always dealing with identifiable data. So this puts strong requirements on data protection and security of any technical implementations. And related to that, since we're making recordings in their home environments, we need to consider good practices like allowing parents to review the video before submitting it and entering or revising their permissions for data sharing after the experiment when they actually know what has been captured on the video. Furthermore, as we're acquiring video data during the experiment, as well as often additional personal data, such as dates of birth, demographic information, etc., it's of course important that data is encrypted and pseudonymized or anonymized. This is not unlike lab testing, of course. But also many countries have laws and regulations, such as GDPR in Europe, which put restrictions on things like the location where the data are stored. And they, like GDPR and other data protection regulations, give participants rights to, for example, review or delete their data. So that means that if you have any types of platform or procedure, you must of course make sure that that it's adherent to these types of regulations. So another question to be answered is where you're going to get your participant from. And of course, I think the obvious things are that you could get it from your own database if you have one, or that you could get them from online advertisement. But there are also recruitment platforms for online developmental science, such as Children Helping Science and Look It for English-speaking populations, and Kinderschaffen Wissen for German-speaking populations. And of course, I have to mention, one can make use of services like from companies like CloudResearch to help with recruitment. And we haven't actually used them yet, but we're currently in contact with CloudResearch. So I hope that that will help our recruitment to boost our numbers. And so apparently, I have been misinformed, but we previously used mTurk and were told that they no longer allow making webcam recordings of their workers, so they couldn't be used for our purposes. But if it turns out that actually this is just something about how we collect the data, then of course mTurk would be back on the map for this type of study. The European counterpart Prolific indicated, at least when we contacted them a year ago, that recruitment for developmental studies with them at that time was not recommended because it didn't seem to work very well. I don't know what phase they're in now, so I don't know whether that would be a feasible option or not. And then, of course, in addition to recruitment, you also have to run your study somewhere. So here are some examples of platforms that are available. So specific for developmental research, you have Lookit for recruitment and for testing, which can also be used in combination with recruitment via Children Helping Science. And other more general testing platforms like Gorilla and Advanced, which I know have worked well for conducting looking studies with infants online. And as said, mTurk should probably then be back in this list because that works reasonably well as well. So all of these platforms have different features and possibilities. I don't have the time to go into those now, but if you wanted to get acquainted with online testing and infant testing, then these would be the ones to check out, I think. So I mentioned earlier that the most commonly used platforms are usually fully in English, which means that the accessibility to a large part of the global population is limited. There are some efforts to make these platforms available in other languages. I will talk about that a little bit at the end of this presentation. But one option to just mention is, of course, you could create your own platform, which is what we ultimately did to be able to deal with certain requests from our IRB. So the benefit, of course, is that you can make your platform exactly the way you want it. You have the flexibility. The obvious downside is that you would need to have or hire the technical expertise to create it and maintain it. So I think if you can make use of an existing platform, I'm not sure I would recommend making your own, but ultimately it depends on what you need and what you find important, of course. So with those practicalities out of the way, let's turn to a little bit more of a sciencey bit. So for your experiment, of course, you need to select a paradigm, and the first and most obvious paradigm to discuss in the context of looking behavior is a visual preference paradigm. This is used a lot in infant science, and it can be either implemented as central looking, which you see here in green on the left, where you show one stimulus at a time and calculate looking time per condition, or as the classical preferential looking paradigm, which you see in green here on the right, where you show two stimuli at the same time and you calculate a looking time to the left and to the right stimulus. This is the easiest paradigm to use for online looking behavior, and researchers like Kim Scott and Laura Schulz have compared preferential looking lab findings to online results and found that the observed patterns are qualitatively very similar, although the effects seem to be a bit weaker when testing online. It's also important maybe to note that central looking paradigms assume that one condition is more interesting than the other. And due to an increase in distractors in the environment, Scott and Schulz actually suggest that it would probably be better to have a left-right preferential looking paradigm than an on-off one, like the central looking one, because it's basically better to always have something on the screen that's for the infant to look at. Second paradigm that many infant researchers are interested in is a type of audiovisual paradigm. This paradigm can be a bit more difficult on online testing because the audiovisual synchrony can be an issue. And in addition, it's hard to get good control over variability in volume and loudspeaker locations. So these issues might require some checks before the study starts. And depending on the purpose of the research, these considerations may or may not be a problem for you as a researcher. If this is something you're interested in, I would refer you to the 2 papers that I've listed here, who both of them have run big studies on audiovisual synchrony across platforms and browsers. And so any type of detailed information can be found there. And then there are 2 more paradigms that are often used in the lab, but that seem quite problematic for online testing. So the one on the left, like a visual world paradigm, or any paradigm basically with more than 2 stimuli, will suffer from insufficient precision in gaze coding. It's really difficult if you have the webcam recording of just the baby without the screen to see anything other than, is the baby looking at the screen or not, or are they looking to the left or the right? Both when coding manually as well as when running automatic gaze coding algorithms on the data. And for habituation paradigms, like you see here on the bottom right, the problem lies in the contingency aspect. So it's currently very hard, or potentially impossible, to use an infant contingent paradigm during asynchronous data acquisition, as it would require good and quick automated gaze coding algorithms to sort of serve as an eye tracker. And these do not exist in a reliable enough form yet. I will say, though, that big progress has been made on running habituation paradigms in synchronous setups, like video conferencing. And one of the main people behind this is Jonathan Kominsky at Harvard University. So if you are looking to do habituation studies with infants online, I would recommend checking out his recent work and potentially considering a asynchronous approach rather than an asynchronous approach. So for the actual data acquisition, as I mentioned before, you need to figure out whether you use an existing platform and whether or not you're using synchronous or asynchronous testing. Other than that, I think it's good to keep in mind that, at least if you're doing asynchronous testing, that the parent, who usually isn't trained for this, is the one you're relying on. You have to give them good instructions. They are basically serving as a co-experimenter. It's very useful to use checks wherever you can, just to make it easier for them. Also, infants are easily distracted, and of course in the home environment there are way more distractors than in the lab, so we probably have to make more engaging stimuli than in a lab setting, just to keep them attending to the screen and not like to the dog or the television or whatever else they might be seeing. And of course, as with any study, whether online or offline, do log as much as you can possibly think of, because it will really help when you're then trying to make sense of the data that you've gotten, and to sort of see whether there were any glitches in the stimulus presentation, etc. So once you have your data set, of course, you want to be analyzing the looking behavior, and the most straightforward way to that is manual gaze coding. Basically, you go through the video frame by frame, and you indicate for every frame, is the baby looking at the target, yes or no? This is a well-established method for lab data, and it works fairly similarly for webcam recordings. However, as anyone who's ever done it knows, it's very labor intensive and it's very sensitive to inter and intra-rater variability. And this is why researchers are trying to move to automatic gaze coding. So there are several algorithms for that available, but their success on infant data has been limited. And part of that could potentially be resolved by improving data quality, like lighting conditions and stuff like that. But there are other aspects of infant testing that are harder to resolve, such as that infants are moving around a lot and have a variable distance to the screen, which can throw these algorithms off. And you can't, of course, tell your infants to please sit still and look always at the screen. So somehow we're going to have to deal with that. Having said that, though, the algorithms have actually improved a lot over the last couple of years. And a few weeks ago, researchers from MIT published a preprint on their eye catcher automatic gaze coding algorithm, which seems to achieve an accuracy of approximately 85% for classifying looking away, looking left, and looking right. There are some limitations to this method, but if that result holds up, it would be a big improvement compared to results found previously by, for example, Bria Chenard and colleagues. And so there's a lot of things to consider when you want to test infants online, and these are at least what I mentioned so far, a couple of them. And to help the developmental community with some of these challenges and hurdles that I've talked about just now, we have set up a brand new Many Babies initiative called Many Babies at Home. Many Babies at Home is a methods-focused project, and our goal is to basically make online testing, online infant testing, robust and accessible for developmental researchers across the world, which means that in addition to conducting multi-lab studies and trying to advance the method, we're also creating, translating, and culturally adapting procedures and documentation. And we have started to translate the Lookit platform into multiple different languages to make it also accessible for I don't know, for Spanish speaking, for French speaking, for Mandarin speaking communities. So we are always looking for more researchers and industry partners who are interested in this project. So if you want to join us, let me know. It's not required to have a baby lab or even be a developmental researcher. Anyone who is interested in this project can join the community and can help out in some way or another. And yeah, to conclude, online testing, I think, has considerable potential, but it does have some challenges that require novel solutions. Platforms for recruitment and data acquisition can address many of these challenges, but they're also currently made for a subset of the global population, which does not exactly contribute to its potential to acquire more diverse samples. And further technological developments like automatic gaze coding may increase convenience and reproducibility of our studies. Projects like Many Babies at Home aim to make the method more robust and accessible across the world. And I think overall, online testing is a powerful new tool for developmental science. And yeah, I'm very curious to see how it develops over the next years. So I've put some of the resources and literature that I've talked about during the presentation on the slide here. But if you have any questions, you can ask them now here, or contact me at l.zatnoordijk@tcd.ie. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Great. Again, the chat is open for any questions. And of course, if you'd rather ask it out loud, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you. So yeah, take the floor. Who has the first question? I'll start. So are many of your studies always like multinational at the same time, or you look at certain countries at different times?
So within the Many Babies at Home project, yes, that is clearly a global effort. Like we are really trying to run the same study in as many different countries and in as many different populations within those countries as possible. We are currently, so it's a big data protection hassle. So we are currently trying to figure out how to do that exactly. And also indeed with the things like translations and cultural adaptations that are just necessary to actually be able to reach all these communities. So most of that currently is still in progress, but we are starting to, we're planning to pilot really soon. So we're almost sort of ready to start going with that. The studies that we run in the lab don't have that focus. So we're welcoming, in principle, parents from any nationality, as long as they speak English, because our platform is also in English. But we don't necessarily do cross-cultural research. There we just test infants, whoever wants to join us.
Yeah, it's kind of like led into my next question, which is like, for countries or markets where it's a lower internet penetration, or maybe there's the technology isn't as well developed or accessible. Do you have strategies to address those things?
Yeah, so we have of course been talking about this. We're currently not sure yet. So I know there are some initiatives about, for instance, sending experiments to people that they then have to unpack and perform sort of locally on their computer. The few people that I know that have done that also have encountered quite some issue with sort of you know, you need to be sort of digital literate, right? Like to actually do that. So I'm currently not completely sure yet how, like, I think we can reach different populations from lab populations, but I'm not sure we can reach all populations. I think there's simply countries and potentially low SES populations which will just be harder to reach due to the requirement of a computer and a webcam and an internet connection. At the same time, I think it would already be great if we would not only study white babies of highly educated parents who live in cities, which is currently what I think our main demographic is. So I think that would already be an improvement if we can go to rural areas, if we can, right, like in that sense, yeah, increase the diversity a little bit.
Great. And we do have a question from Anna. So I'm going to unmute Anna. See if I can actually. I think, Anna, I think you're able to speak. So.
Yes, I also have a webcam. Sorry, I'm just in the office, so it's not very good. I was wondering about the Many Babies initiative with the online studies. Do you plan to run really new studies, or the first aim is to validate studies from the lab setting, or what's your preferred paradigm? I'm also in this Slack group, so I'm following it more or less, but I'm just curious to hear from you and the plans.
Yes, no, that's an excellent question. So the first study that we're now planning is basically a proof of concept study. So we're using a paradigm that we know works with an effect that we assume we'll find. And if we don't find it, then that would be worrisome because it's very well established in the lab. Because that study we are mostly using to remove any hurdles that, right, because there's so many things that are coming our way that we didn't even think about. So we're using that study, very simple study. It's just to be like a preferential looking study to sort of make this whole consortium thing work. After that, we're actually planning to run whatever people are interested in. So it will be a bit of a grassroots type of setting where people can suggest studies, and if there is enough interest, then this can just simply start to develop, and we're there for a large part just to facilitate things. So in that sense, we're in contact with Lookit. We're also trying to make them GDPR compliant, which is a whole different topic. And otherwise, we're trying to see whether we can run, for instance, the same studies on multiple different platforms, if this would work better. Of course, the problem is we are translating Lookit, but we can't translate every single platform there is out there, right? So we have to sort of balance between, we need to be able to collect data within Europe, but also it needs to be somewhat feasible in terms of the effort that's put in. So it's a bit of a mixture at the moment. And for instance, one of the very silly things that we ran up against, we didn't even think was going to be a problem, is reimbursement. In some countries you have to reimburse, in some countries you're not allowed to reimburse, and in some countries you can reimburse but not too much, and in some other countries you have to reimburse at least a certain amount, and then in some countries you must reimburse but not actual money. And so it's like, okay, that's great, but how are we going to actually make that work? And if you have like Many Babies has done studies before, multi-lab studies before, this was never a problem because it sort of happened locally. So you, in the lab, you just could use the policy that was within the restrictions of your sort of local regulation. But now, if we're just recruiting on Lookit, based on what are we going to decide which regulation should apply, and all of these questions. So there's all sorts of admin-y things that we didn't even think were gonna come our way that have to be involved as well.